Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to your second webinar from the New Talent Alliance. My name is Natalie Dawes, and I'm one of the steering group members here at the New Talent Alliance. I'm not on my own this afternoon, and I will introduce some of my fellow steering group members in just a moment. This webinar is a bit of a follow-on, really, actually, to the success of the webinar that we ran last November about an introduction to apprenticeships, and during what is this week National Apprenticeships Week, we thought it would be a really good idea to host another webinar to dig just that little bit deeper when it comes to things like apprenticeships, a really valuable and viable way to bring new people into this industry. But before we get into the devil in the detail in all of that, let me just remind you a little bit about the New Talent Alliance. So we are an industry initiative that was set up around March 2024, and we are a collaboration of industry people that all have one thing in common, and we want to make a big difference when it comes to people coming into this wonderful industry and having the most wonderful career in the profession that we have built within financial advice. There are three prongs to the New Talent Alliance's approach, in that we want to engage with as many people as we possibly can within the industry, have you all on board and shouting from the rooftops about what a brilliant industry this is to work within, and hopefully encourage some new blood to come our way and really want to have a career over in financial advice. That said, there's a few things that we need to do. So a little bit of inspiration is needed here. We want to encourage lots of people to create opportunity for that new blood to come into the industry. So we want to inspire as many people as possible. And actually this webinar feeds in really nicely to that value of the New Talent Alliance. That said, we're not naive either. We also know that there are lots of concerns, lots of worries, barriers to firms recruiting and creating these opportunities for people to come into the industry. Again, this webinar fits really nicely into that value, and we're going to work a bit more deeply across that as we take you through this next 45 minutes or so. But ultimately, we are here to engage with everybody, to inspire you to create opportunity, but perhaps most importantly, support you in doing that. I am now going to introduce you to a couple of my other colleagues on the New Talent Alliance, and that is Alex Langhorn and John Somerville. So Alex, can I come to you just to do a brief introduction of yourself?
You can. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you very much for inviting me on to the webinar today. It's great to be here. I'm here representing the Davies Group. Obviously, Natalie and I go a long way back, having worked together at BTS for a number of years, and then with the Davies Group for just over a year now. I work within people development, and my role and the team that I work as part of look after both apprenticeships and also commercial training solutions for financial services and insurance. So today I'm here to share some insight into the way in which we've worked with individual learners, but also employers, and to really shine a lens on some of the different ways that we can structure apprenticeships to achieve different outcomes for employers.
Amazing. Thank you, Alex. John, over to you.
Hi, I'm John Somerville from LIBF, Director of Financial Services. My 6 degrees of separation linked to BTS Davies Group is that I used to work with the founders, Jeff Scholes and Louisa Todd, back in the day, many moons ago when I was at AXA. It was an absolute pleasure having worked with them over those years. But since then, moved into various different roles in financial services, developed a career, really. I've served my apprenticeship, I guess, in a lot of respects through various different roles within the industry. And the last 7.5 years have been at LIBF, focusing on qualifications, and more recently in the apprenticeship space, where we are now offering level 3, level 4, but have for many years also offered level 6 apprenticeships in the degree side. So we've got several different things that we can chat to you about on that sort of stuff today. So lots and lots of things to share really between Alex and myself. So looking forward to sharing those as we go along.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, both. And I didn't actually introduce myself earlier on, which was slightly rude of me. So for that, I apologise. I am Natalie Dawes, and I'm actually the editor at Professional Paraplanner. But as Alex has said, long background there. Not worked directly with John, but had lots and lots of communication over the last 18 months or so via the New Talent Alliance. My role is to bring lots of content and lots of insight and guidance and support to the paraplanning community predominantly, but as wide a reach as we can make as well. And on weeks like this, so National Apprenticeships Week, it was a fantastic way for me to go, hey, I can bring something here because of the past experience that I've had via roles such as at BTS and Davies Group as well, and the exposure that I've had to apprenticeships. And I am absolutely an advocate for apprenticeships being a really viable way to bring new people into the industry. So when it comes to National Apprenticeships Week, what is it all about? Well, it is a huge opportunity to shine a much needed spotlight on apprenticeships as that valuable route into the industry. Even now, if you were to Google the word apprenticeship and you switch over to images, what will you see? And you will see lots of very young people. You will see lots of people in trade industries. Very rarely do you see people that are working towards a financial services based career. That is something that we need to change. And again, another reason to run this webinar during National Apprenticeships Weeks. John mentioned it a moment ago. There is loads of stuff going on within the industry this week for National Apprenticeships Week. So whether it be articles like the ones that we've done at Professional Paraplanner and lots of other articles out there as well through professional bodies, training providers, there's lots of information out there. So please do tap into it. But if there was one thing I could say off the back of this week, it's don't let the conversation stop. We have these weeks and we go to town in shining that spotlight, but these conversations have got to keep coming. So please do keep talking to us at New Talent Alliance, have conversations with each other, speak to people that have been through apprenticeships, and let's really get things to where they need to be so that when we do Google things like apprenticeships, it isn't just what we're seeing right now coming up. So let's make change together. So National Apprenticeships Week, great week to be holding this webinar. And in the last webinar that we ran, we actually talked about an introduction to apprenticeships. It gave you a little bit of foundation knowledge around what they're all about, what eligibility looks like, who can do an apprenticeship, what does it look like likely from an employer point of view. Today, we are going to get really beneath the bonnet and we are going to talk to you about some real life case studies. So apprenticeships that have actually taken place, how they went, what went well, what were the challenges, all of that kind of stuff so that you get a much better insight. And to do that, I'm going to hand over to John, first of all, to talk through a couple of case studies that LIBF have worked on. So John, over to you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. So yes, we're going to go through some real life and actual case scenarios where we have had students go through the apprenticeship learning experience. And obviously I've been around long enough to remember when apprenticeships were a thing back, in the 70s and 80s, and what it meant to achieve an apprenticeship from an individual perspective. And that's what we're going to try and get across here today, because you'll often hear people who've said, I served my apprenticeship and I was very proud of it and this is what I achieved from it and that sort of thing. But more recently, we know about the government-led apprenticeship schemes and what have you that are available, but we're not, so far, you probably haven't seen an awful lot of the outputs and what happens when an apprentice actually achieves what they've come out to start out with. So this first case study is Reese, who served his apprenticeship with us at level 6 through the Marsden Building Society. So he was working and now works in the asset and liability management team. Reese is the first apprentice the department had taken on and was a sixth form school leaver at the point he started his apprenticeship. So give you a bit of background about him. In November, Reese, who was within his second year of his apprenticeship at the Marsden, found himself as the only member of the department available for 2 days. So both his senior managers were away at an industry event, and the remaining team members were unfortunately unexpectedly off sick. That meant that Reese had to take responsibility for the society's daily treasury activity. And that activity directly underpins the liquidity, mortgage completion, savings withdrawals, collateral management, and regulatory compliance. Now, any of you who are out there who work in the mortgage space as much as they do in the financial advice space will know that if that stuff started grinding to a halt and you started getting delays, that would really affect the outcomes of many different customers. So with minimal prior hands-on experience, but strong preparation and shadowing, which is what the apprenticeship really set him up for. It's not just the qualification, but it's also the on-site experience that he's gaining. Reece managed all daily treasury movements, monitored cash and liquidity positions, ensured regulatory and policy limits were met, and proactively identified and checked a potential end-of-day overdraft risk in the principal clearing account. He escalated appropriately, confirmed funding movements, maintained headroom against daylight exposure limits, and balanced operational risk with profit optimization, all while keeping senior leaders informed remotely. And he was only able to achieve that because of the hands-on experience he was gaining through his apprenticeship scheme, not just through attending courses in order to progress his learning through a qualification. That was giving him the knowledge side of it, but the skills and behaviors that you gain were absolutely invaluable when it came to actually fulfilling this role. So the outcome, there were no breaches, there was no disruption, and there was no operational impact. Mortgage completions were completed, savings withdrawals met, regulatory expectations were upheld, and senior leaders able to focus on external representation, knowing the business was safe. This wasn't theoretical learning, this was real responsibility in a live, regulated environment, delivering tangible business value. And that's the difference an apprenticeship makes when they're properly trained, trusted, and developed. So that's our first case study. But hopefully you'll agree that actually, it's not just about the qualification. If you had somebody who was just studying the qualification, would they be able to step up in that particular way? And I think that's a really powerful example. My next case study 2, is Charles, who is also second-year apprentice at Barclays, UK Corporate Banking, another one of our major clients. So Charles was a second-year level 6 apprentice at Barclays when he was asked to step up and cover a AVP level portfolio, 3 grades above his role, which involved looking after high-value global clients. Because he'd been trained in the business, not just the theory, he took ownership quickly, managing complex client relationships, contributing to a major global RFP, and working confidently with senior stakeholders in the UK and the US. The work landed, the client delivery was strong, and the business recognised the impact. Charles, therefore, was nominated for the Global Corporate Banking Exceptional Achievement Award by his senior leadership team, and he won it. That's the employer benefit: faster productivity, lower risk, and future leaders proving their value while they're still apprentices. So you can imagine the grounding he's got, the experience he gained through 2 years of his apprenticeship meant that he could step in very, very quickly indeed. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to quickly read out the actual nomination written by Barclays for Charles to achieve the award. So Charles, a second-year high apprentice who joined my team in November 2024, he was clearly a talented individual who embodied the Barclays values and mindset, and who was looking for a stretch opportunity that would really allow him to demonstrate his skills and knowledge. Due to a colleague moving into a new role, an opportunity came up for Charles to cover a high-value portfolio of clients and show us what he could achieve. Charles has been outstanding in his delivery. 6 weeks into the role, Charles has worked diligently to learn from the buddy we provided to upskill his knowledge as required, gain the trust and advocacy of some challenging key stakeholders, and deliver excellence to the client base he is looking after. And that's the value of the apprenticeship. I mean, it really does demonstrate the difference, somebody who is being trained properly. And bearing in mind, all of this is funded by the apprenticeship levy, and certainly with Barclays, it's made an incredible difference. And Barclays use us significantly and continue to do so. It is an absolutely amazing scheme for them. And to demonstrate somebody at that level is quite exceptional. We're very, very proud of Charles, as much as Barclays are very, very proud of him as well, as you can imagine. So moving on, there we go. So what's in it for me? Sorry, let's get my notes up. So you'll see from the slide, our surveys, which are conducted at various points through the programme, show that before the apprenticeship, financial planning was basically invisible or written off as corporate, accountancy-led, and not a career for people like them. The apprenticeship changes all of that. It's paid, structured route with real client exposure from day one. So apprentices quickly understand what the role actually is helping people make sense of their lives through money. And what we see afterwards is the shift that matters. Confidence increases, people feel they belong to the profession, and they start describing financial planning as purposeful, people-focused career, and not just a finance job. And that's the point. Apprenticeships don't just fill vacancies, they reset perceptions and create next generation of financial planners, which is exactly what we all want. We want this to be an all-round career, and apprenticeships fall very much a part of that. We've always said that this isn't an industry, it's a profession. And as a profession, we should act as a profession. And part of that is fulfilling that apprenticeship role. And the beauty of the apprenticeship schemes that are out there and the way that the learning is led means that for small and medium-sized firms who aren't scaled up to be able to fulfill a L&D role within their firms, can get that really experienced learning and development through qualifications and skills and behaviour training, all fully funded through a fully operational government levy scheme, which I think is just absolutely exceptional. And so from that point of view, we can move this profession forward in a very, very big way. So that's some examples from the LIBF, including our questionnaires, and obviously something that we do on a regular basis. I'm now going to hand over to Alex, who's going to talk through another couple of examples for us.
Thank you, John. That was perfect. And perfect segue into the two case studies that I've selected to bring from Davies. John there's provided two really unique case studies on individual learners. I've also got an individual learner to talk through. But before I do that, I want to sort of zoom out and have a look at a firm-wide case study that we're working with at the moment. And this really is designed to paint a picture into one of the ways that you can use the apprenticeship structure to create a programme and that talent development pathway throughout an organisation. So the particular employer that I'm using for this case study is a national network. So they have a number of subsidiaries within the group who are all independent businesses within wealth management, wealth planning, and then a central overarching hub. And what they wanted to do was to create a flagship advisor academy to train up the next generation of advisors and to roll it out as a centralized development pathway across their regional hubs. They wanted a closed cohort approach, and they saw the apprenticeship as one way to achieve this. So we've been working with them to design this. It's been a really exciting project to be part of, and it's getting close to being ready to be launched in the next month or so. So what this case study gives you an idea of is the way you can work in partnership with a training provider, a learning provider, to build something that is bespoke to your organisation, to your firm. It's also designed to give you an idea of, if you perhaps are a smaller firm as part of a larger group, a larger organisation, how perhaps talking to the centralised body about putting something like this similar together allows you to access a training platform, a training program that is centralized for the whole organization, whilst also being within your regional hubs. So to give you a bit more background on how this has worked and how we've put this together, it's a really brilliant example of how you can coordinate an apprenticeship strategy through multiple regional hubs, create consistency, and ultimately the goal is to strengthen a capability across the whole network. So what we've done at Davies is we've worked with the employer to really explore what the needs were in all of the different regions, to explore what was happening on the ground already. Some of those regional hubs were already using apprenticeships in different ways, some were not. Some of those regional hubs were levy payers, some were not. So the first practical thing that we've really worked on with this team is to look at the funding model and how they can centralise the levy funding. Now, this will be very different for each organisation. So if you're listening to this and thinking, how would that work for me? The best thing to do is to speak to a provider and have a look at that in detail. Because what we've been able to do in this situation is to bring together the DAS system into one centralised place and start to work with the different funding streams available to this organisation to maximise the availability of the funding across the whole group. Now, that obviously will look different depending on your different structures and different organisations. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about the particular outcome that we've achieved here, because it might be very different to what you've got back at your organisation. So absolutely come and have a chat, and we can work through all the different ways and creative ways to put together a compliant funding model that will work for your entire network. But that's one of the benefits, is that you can centralise the funding and centralise the administration. But what's great about this programme and this case study is we're putting together a flagship academy that the firm can advertise across the whole of the network. And we're creating a closed cohort for financial planners and paraplanners to join together in a cohesive training pathway. So individual learners from across the network are able to come on programme at the same time. It will be rolled out regularly across the 12-month period in the year, and they join with a launch event where we can all come together and celebrate the launch of the training programme. And then they'll travel through their 18 to 24 months together as a group, and pass out eventually with a graduation ceremony, which we can feed into as a training provider. But we've also been able to layer in internal mentoring with the firm themselves. So we're looking at taking the established apprenticeship framework and layering that on top of the internal mentoring and internal training pathways that they would like to see within their organisation. So it becomes a really bespoke apprenticeship using the framework. So that's the sort of first case study that I wanted to give you an insight into. It's in its infancy. It's really exciting to see it grow. Essentially, it's going to allow an apprenticeship framework to be used for a business to align with its own milestones and needs. And I'm really excited to see it launch in the next couple of months. So watch this space on that one. The other case study that I wanted to have a look at, we can move on to the fourth one. Thank you, Natalie. This one takes us back to the individual learners. And this is the bit that I love, when you really look back, John just did there, on the impact you can make on individual learners. And John alluded to one of the challenges of training in financial services, especially for smaller firms, and that is often the ability to scale up the support that individuals need as they're progressing through their training. Now, I've worked with BTS for a number of years and Davies now for nearly a year and a half. And one of the things that still, even in my role with Davies, comes through when I'm speaking to employers and also individual learners is that the training that they have doesn't exist in a vacuum. Life happens in the beautiful way that it does, and things come across a learner's life that can, if not managed with care and with support, can derail them from their learning. And we see this happen time and time again, especially in a profession like financial services, where training is wonderfully flexible, very much self-directed by the learner, which is fantastic. But what can happen without the structure and support and the wraparound care is learners can be derailed by all sorts of things in professional life, work changes, personal life, even emotional challenges that learners can face. Adult learners, I've worked with adult learners for most of my professional life, and one of the things that is wonderful about them is how colourful their lives are and the vast experience that they bring to a role when they're training. But that does sometimes present some challenges. So what this case study shows is the power of an apprenticeship to bring that wraparound support. Because obviously these qualifications, especially the level 4 professional paraplanner and financial planner apprenticeship, they can be sat outside of an apprenticeship. They can be sat independently by learners. But what the apprenticeship brings is a structure and a programme of support, and not least a coach that supports that learner through their period of study. So this particular learner actually completed the previous financial advisor apprenticeship. So this was a learner who graduated back in July last year, just before the new standards were released. They completed the previous programme with us. And they actually described the period of their life when this apprenticeship was taking place as one of the most turbulent periods of time in their life. Because they had an awful lot of things happen in their professional and personal life throughout the programme. But they did successfully, as it says on the slide, achieve their distinction. And they credited that in their final review to what they described as the rock solid source of guidance, information and support that they had from their coach. They described their coach as their sort of consistent reference point throughout the apprenticeship. They were approachable, knowledgeable, deeply invested in this individual's success. And what they've described is how their coach took the relationship that they had with the learner and really personalised the journey for the individual to help them navigate using challenge and support in equal measure to help them achieve the distinction that they ultimately got to in the end. And I think what this really shows is that absolutely the apprenticeship gives the professional qualification that can be taken outside of an apprenticeship framework. But there's more to professionalism and success than just achieving the exams. The knowledge, skills and behaviour framework of an apprenticeship and that predictable relationship-based coaching approach really makes a difference to a learner's success. And ultimately, I have seen over my professional life learners be derailed, defer their success, where things have happened that have meant they've not been able to complete their qualifications. And then the cost then to the business who perhaps supported them or to the individual learner for their time invested is massive. And the difference that this relationship made to this learner was really clear to see. So I think that the apprenticeship provides, especially for smaller firms, but equally so for larger firms, the structure and that wraparound care around the qualification that will really make the difference to the success and the outcome for the learner and for the business. So that summarises my two case studies. So as I said, one from a learner's point of view and one that was a little bit more complicated, perhaps from a firm's point of view. But really, I think goes to show how the structure of an apprenticeship can make a real difference to a training pathway as we start to build those. And in the early stages of these apprenticeships, how we can customise them and work as John does and as we do at Davies with employers and with learners to customise that pathway to achieve the outcomes.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much because I think we had 4 quite detailed but very different case studies there as well to look at things from a number of different angles. And I was sat there sort of listening to each of you go through those, and there's something that I thought we could explore in a little bit more detail, if I may. And that is around framework, but it's also around a word that I want to introduce right now, which is partnership, and something I think is often overlooked when it comes to apprenticeships. So the framework that's provided actually ends up being a partnership, and that partnership is between 3 different sets of people, if you like. One, of course, is the apprentice, the second being the employer, and the third being the training provider. And it would be good, I think, to just give a little bit more detail around how that partnership really does work hand in hand. But I want to start with the employer, because we are here to try and convince you all that apprenticeships are a great way to bring new people into your businesses. But when I have conversations with potential employers, I've had them in this last week, 10 days or so, the thing that comes back time and time and time again is how do we get something like that off the ground within our business? We have never recruited, we have never brought someone new into our business. So Alex or John, and I will leave you to decide as to who would like to go first on this, and perhaps we've both got input, but how does something like that happen? How does the training provider help the employer to get that kind of strategy off the ground?
Alex, do you want me to go first? I'm happy. Yeah.
I don't mind. I'm ready and waiting as well.
We've all got so much to say.
Yeah. So it's so first of all, Natalie, it's an absolutely amazing, enormous question, really. And the first starting point really is the need for the business. Where is critically the need? Once they've established what that need is, because you need to then recruit the right person into the role that is going to go through it. So it's not a case of you need somebody who's going to commit, they understand what they're going to go through, all that sort of stuff. So the first thing to understand really is that your training provider will walk you through the process. And what we are doing at LIBF is providing all of the employers, when they are curious about this and looking into it and we want to start going down this recruitment route, is providing the employer with a set of criteria that they need to try and work to in order to make sure they've got the right candidate, that they're set up correctly, that they know what the need is, and that they can get themselves into a position where the program is set. The next part of that is, like you say, and it's so critical, this is the partnership between the training provider and the employer. So the employers, clearly, they're not geared up for running this themselves, and that's the whole point. The training provider will do this for them, and of course this is the misunderstanding, I think, in that they feel like the only way I described this in the past is that when you sort of worked in a firm and somebody came around and said, "Oh, this is Jim, he's on work experience this week, can you do something with him?" Right? Okay, and that's what I think people fear, is like, "Oh God, I've got this person, what do I do with them?" And people struggled for that for a week. But if you turn that around to what you would do for an intern for 3 months through the summer from a university placement, that sort of thing, you would have a role for them to do, and you give them specific sort of instruction. Now, what the training provider does on an apprenticeship scheme is we will effectively grid out month by month the skills, knowledge, and behaviours that each of these apprentices need to be able to demonstrate and log in their logbooks on a monthly basis. And then there's tutor support that will help them through that, and then potentially a qualification depending on what level they're at. So if they're at level 3, there isn't a qualification attached to it, but at level 4 there is. Level 3 is ideal because it's kind of a very open way of learning through an apprentice scheme, and can be more bespoke towards that individual firm for administration and that sort of thing. Level 4 is more geared towards the level 4 diploma qualification. So whichever route you want to go down, the training provider will lay that out so that you know exactly what you're going to do on a month-by-month basis. Alex, do you want to add to that? Sorry, I've got run off a little bit there. So
no, absolutely. I mean, it's the same nuts and bolts, isn't it? Whichever way you look at it. But I think that's where the partnership really comes in, because we, as you say, John, at Davies, we'll work with an employer who might come to us knowing absolutely nothing about apprenticeships, or they might have used them before and not had a great experience, or not have a clue really how an apprenticeship could work to their advantage. So it really is exploring and not being afraid to ask daft questions. There are no daft questions with apprenticeships, because the model changes so frequently that to know what the current frameworks are is really difficult unless you're speaking to somebody who is looking at that on a daily basis. Absolutely lean on a provider to ask those what feel like stupid questions, because things are changing regularly. And then it's about unpicking what is that goal, what is the recruitment need, what is also the talent pipeline that you're trying to develop and establish, and there's so many different apprenticeships that can be used. I focused heavily on the level 4 in my 2 case studies, but as John said, the level 3 and the level 6, so there's different pathways through to supporting the pathway that you're trying to achieve. And what we would do is, just as John said, it's about making sure we get the right learner on the right program at the right time. It's not about shoehorning apprenticeships in to use a levy. It's to make sure that it's fit for purpose and it's the right approach for the right learner. And your provider will work with you to do that, and to make sure that the learner is the right person for the program, and can support with that recruitment and support with the onboarding. And we have what's called a skills radar, which makes sure we're really checking the learner is on the right program. So for things like the level 4 financial planner, you probably have people in your firms who've got some experience already. So it's making sure that they've got some experience is absolutely fine, but not too much experience that means that the apprenticeship isn't the right fit for them. So I think that's where the partnership really comes in, to make sure that we're making sure this framework that we've been given, if you like, the Trailblazer Group have worked with to put together, is fantastic as it is, but how do we make sure it's exactly right for the employer and it will achieve those goals?
Yeah, to pick up on another point, Alex, actually, that you made earlier on, you used the word bespoke earlier on, and I think a lot of sort of perception, and I will put my hands up myself, and prior to really knowing as much as I now know about apprenticeships, I thought an apprenticeship program was put together and then each training provider just delivered it as is, and it isn't like that. Every training provider will deliver an apprenticeship program slightly differently, but irrelevant as to the training provider that you choose, the program and that partnership between the training provider and the employer will be really bespoke. So they'll help you build whatever it is that you need to be able to bring in apprentices and support them and nurture them, coach them. We talked about coaches earlier on and the power that is there, the amount of, and again, I'm going to quote some words that were said earlier on, wraparound support. This isn't just a case of there's your apprenticeship program and the work you need to do and your qualifications, off you go. It's continuous throughout the duration of that program, helping you to build the real support that is needed for both the apprentice and for the employer. And I think that is something, as we said earlier on, that is very much overlooked. Alex, you also mentioned about not being afraid to ask stupid questions. I'm going to say, don't be afraid to ask questions at all, because we haven't had a single question in the chat yet, and you are very, very welcome to ask questions. Please do. And there's nothing worse, is there, being the first person to ask a question, but actually I asked the first question. John said it was a biggie. So I'm sure that your questions might be slightly smaller, and please don't be afraid to ask them. So if you do have questions, pop them in the chat just there. I do have one more before we move into the next slide, just a little bit of terminology that we used earlier on. What do we mean by the DAS system? Alex or John, who'd like to?
I'll let Alex answer that one. I'm not,
like, I don't need to go down on this one, but for those that don't know, what is the DAS system?
I certainly won't pretend to be an expert on it myself. So John and I are both holding our hands up there, so we're not experts on what it is. No. But this is where you will have people within your training provider who absolutely are experts on what the DAS system are, and that you may already have somebody in your organisation who's used it as well. But it's essentially the government data dashboard that you have as a levy paying firm that allows you to log in to see the balance of the levy that you've paid, your utilisation of it, your learners on programme at the moment, and when you work with a provider, your provider will help you to set that up. So if you haven't used it before and you haven't got one of the key things that we offer as providers is to help you set that system up so that you can log into it, and we can help administer the funding and the outcomes of the apprenticeships via the government system. So obviously it's a government funded programme, so there's lots of reporting that needs to happen to Skills England to make sure that those reports are done in a timely fashion and that we can monitor successes and outcomes of the programmes. So it's a centralised system that you'll have access to if you're a levy payer, and you'll have lots of support via your provider. And if you want to add anything, John, because I said not an expert in DAS systems at all.
No, there's two things I'd like to add to that, which I think is really sort of relevant. And the first one is on the funding front, we deal with it for you. So a lot of people worry that they've got to get involved in the finances and they've got to fill in claim forms and put some money up themselves and do all that kind of stuff. We deal with that for you. Don't feel that, so that funding we draw down. The other thing about the funding, which is interesting, is it's drawn down on a monthly basis. So after month 2 of the apprentice starting, we draw down the money on a monthly basis. If for some reason, and let's be fair about it, life happens, people change jobs, people don't fulfill their requirements, etc. They do move on. It does happen. If they do move on, you don't have to pay anything back. That's another thing that people worry about. They don't. People think, I'm just going to leave me out of pocket because they didn't finish their apprenticeship scheme. All that happens is it just ends there, and then you go and find somebody new. But obviously, this makes the recruitment of those people really critical, in that you really want them to complete. If you looked at what the government announced at the weekend, which was the start of the short courses they were talking about, the targeted short courses for industries that need apprentices through on a rapid basis. One of the things they worry about, and the reason why they're shortening a lot of the apprenticeship schemes that are out there, is that the completion rates are a little low in certain industries, and then we need to try and improve that. And one of those is financial advice. So we need to make sure that people jump onto those, stay on them, and we keep them right the way through to the end. It's absolutely vital, because that shows that we are progressing people through an apprenticeship scheme. Because the second point that Alex just brought up, and I think is absolutely incredibly vital in all of this, is that it is government backed. The government are behind it. I appreciate that we've got some noise around the government at the moment. I think we've all sort of seen enough news lately. But the people who are backing this, it's not a kind of fly-by-night, here's a bit of a course, off you go. This is serious stuff, this apprenticeship stuff. The billions of pounds that are being invested into it, the emphasis on getting 50,000 new people through apprenticeship schemes in the UK in the next 12 months. This is important, vital stuff for the economy, and the government know this, so they want us to do this. This is not feel like I'm trying to get a bit of money out of the government for a bit of training. This is not that at all. This is actually vital for the economy to drive people forward in this. One final thing on funding is we've talked about level 3, level 4, level 6, and people coming out of the education system and going into apprenticeships. And you'll have seen a lot of noise at the start of the week about people not being able to repay their student loans after years and years and years, let alone the ones that are going through at the moment. Thousands and thousands, they can't even service their own interest, because that, as quoted by somebody on BBC News the other day, this wasn't the funding that was sold to me when I took it on. Okay, so they went off to university, got the degree, and then and even in a well-paid job, are finding it a struggle to repay the interest, let alone find a job at the moment, which of course is very, very difficult for graduates. The beauty about apprenticeship schemes is that it gives you a career. It stops you having to have a debt. It means your earning potentials are much higher, because you've already, you're not actually getting yourself in debt in the first place, and you're actually building yourself a career. You're building, you're further through the job market. And at the end of the apprenticeship scheme, have got something to show for it. And you're not starting from a negative position, you're starting from a positive position. I don't think anybody could, and as an employer on this call, you're responsible for helping people get into that position. And what a marvelous thing that is. I think that's just bloody brilliant. And I think we should all be very proud of ourselves for even, getting on this and thinking, yeah, this is for us. So anyway, sorry, soapbox moment there, Natalie. I do apologize. Sorry, Alex. But I think, Alex, you raised such great points, and I just wanted to come in on the back of that, because I think they're just amazing.
Thank you both, and equally apologies, because I threw you both under the bus there with that does question, and I knew when I asked it I was going to be sat there seething at Natalie asking this question, but you handled it beautifully, and we had loads of other things to talk about as well, so thank you both very, very much. You'll notice that I've moved the slides on just very briefly. And just a couple of other points to pick up. I've also noticed some questions have gone in, so we'll pick those up at the end of the session. So thank you, and keep them coming if there are more. Excuse me. So one of the other things, John, that you mentioned earlier on through talking through your case studies was around stakeholders and communicating with various different levels of the business. And I think, again, this is something that is overlooked within apprenticeship. So if we consider, we've talked about knowledge, we've talked about skills, behaviours, but just digging deeper very slightly on those. And I think something to focus on here is that communication piece, so the soft skills piece. Alex, you mentioned earlier on that because of the sort of fluidity and the accessibility of qualifications within financial services, anybody can go and do these qualifications. But to put it into context, not everybody can just go and sit at level 4 qualification, gain their diploma, and be good to go with giving advice. There's so much more to it in terms of the training that's required and the skills that are built. Apprenticeships, I'm sure you both agree, and feel free to add anything, provide that stuff that's missing so it fills the gap. Would you agree with that?
Totally. I mean, you saw my examples. This person, both of my examples, neither of them had actually completed their apprenticeship at that time. So they were still within their apprenticeship, and yet they gained enough experience in the 2 years that they were on their apprenticeship scheme. And that's obviously level 6, so it's a little bit longer than the level 3 and level 4, clearly. So level 3, just because there's a little bit of time limit, and one of the questions, I'll cover that now. So level 3, 8 to 12 months. Level 4 is 18 months, and then obviously, depending on the scheme, obviously, but financial advice generally 18 months. And then forward from that, you've got the level 6, which goes on for as long as the qualification, really, as far as the degree is concerned. So yeah, I mean, the whole point is that if you're just doing the qualification through an academy, through a training provider, whatever, then it's the length of the qualification. And when you come out of it, you've done the qualification. So you've got the knowledge bit. But apprenticeships are measured on behaviours and skills as well. And those are very well documented. And at the endpoint assessment, all of those things are measured at the end. The endpoint assessor will not sign that individual apprentice off until they have covered all aspects of the knowledge, skills and behaviours. So the knowledge part, which is the qualification part, obviously vital. It is a license to trade qualification for financial advice, equally for mortgage advice. But, and a big but, it doesn't stop there. You have to know how to operate within your job, and that's where the skills come in. So anyway, that's what I'm going to add to it. Alex, over to you.
Yeah, I think following on from the coaching example that I used earlier, part of an apprenticeship is providing evidence throughout your time whilst you're training that you're hitting the competencies in the framework. And obviously the qualifications are there to say yes or no. Have you passed each of the RO exams, if you like, if you do it that way, or whichever examining body you're using? As you pass those exams, you're getting the knowledge piece ticked off, but you've also, as part of the apprenticeship, got to evidence throughout the 12 to 18 month period the competencies within the framework. And that's where the coach relationship comes in to support learners to collect that evidence and present that. So they have a system that they can log into on a weekly basis to be logging their time, to be logging their activities and logging their evidence and collecting throughout their time. So it gives them more than just the qualification. It is more than just I've sat the exams, which, as we know, Natalie and I know, you can, from our time at BTS, people can do those in rapid time if they really want to. But does that make them a good advisor? There's obviously an awful lot more to it than the knowledge. So in answer to sort of Jason's question in the chat there around the length of time, it is an 18-month program, so that you are restricted to that. You can't get through it quicker unless perhaps you've already got some of the qualifications in advance. It is possible to still do the apprenticeship if one or two of the ROs are already under the learner's belt, and the program can be adjusted for that. But essentially you are looking at that 18-month period of time. So it's not a rapid 4 month, which you could do if you wanted to, and commercially you could sit the exams in 4 months. We've seen people do it, but it gives them that time. The role that they're working in whilst they're doing the apprenticeship is not an advice role. There's no requirement for it to be an advice role, so obviously they can't give advice if they haven't got the level 4. So the new standard means that they can be working within a financial services environment, but they don't have to evidence advice as part of their competencies. So it gives them that more protracted time frame to build the skills alongside the knowledge.
Absolutely that. And just to pick up on a couple of points there is around that time frame piece as well. To flip that, when you sort of mentioned, could you do it in 4 months? You probably could, but it's a really tall ask, and it's being realistic as well within the business. Can you expose somebody to the amount of things that you're going to need to expose them to give them that well-rounded piece of training and overall toolkit of skills that they are going to need? So as much as some businesses might be saying, actually, we need you to do that quicker, perhaps then the apprenticeship route might not be best. And I think it is worth calling out as well that we are talking about the apprenticeship route, and we are talking about it in a very positive light, because it's one that is underutilized right now, but it isn't necessarily going to be the right route for every single learner or indeed every single business. And that's where, again, that partnership, those initial conversations, discovery, if you like, that occur between a training provider and an employer, and include the potential apprentice within that, are going to really uncover whether this is the right route. So if you're sat there now sort of thinking, I'm still not sure, have those conversations, take it to the next step, get in touch with different training providers, do your due diligence there as well, because there are lots of different training providers. We've got a couple here today, there are others as well. And indeed think about different routes, whether it be the level 3, whether it be the level 4, whether it be the level 6 that is appropriate. That led me in very nicely, didn't it? But John, you've mentioned this a couple of times now, and some of the examples that you've given, you've got people en route to sort of a level 6, but people starting out within the industry, a level 3 apprenticeship could be the perfect way to bring them in, to introduce them to all the fundamentals of the industry, to different roles, to different areas of the business. And you can take that stage by stage and move into a level 4 the timing might be right to start somebody on a level 4 apprenticeship, dependent on what business needs are, dependent on what the individual career aspirations are of the individual as well. And I'll show you a little bit more detail within level 4 in just a moment. But just to pick up very slightly on level 6 as well, because it is definitely worth mentioning, lots of people often will say to me, okay, so I've got this position of, do I go to university or do I look at a degree apprenticeship? And John, you made some really valuable points earlier on your soapbox, where you talked about the validity behind looking at an apprenticeship route. But it's a stage by stage. We call this a pathway. So build someone in from that level 3, take it up to that level 4, go down that level 6 path later on. There are so many opportunities here for professional development, business growth, bringing people as apprentices within your business, but also those much longer term aspirations as well around the academic side of things with the professional qualifications that can be built in with goodness knows how much more support wrapped around that as well. So that was just a little point there around level 3, 4 and 6. Just to focus very lightly on that level 4 piece, and the reason that I'm doing this partly is because some of the case studies that we've looked at today have been based on the level 4 position, but secondly because it in many ways feels like old news that we've got this new level 4 standard, but actually if we consider how much apprenticeships are still very much underutilised, this does still feel very much like new news. So just to highlight this, the new level 4 standard was released, I believe, last May 2025, so not that long ago. But what has changed is that we now have a dual route. I'm really happy about this because I've always firmly believed that paraplanning is a career in its own right. Not everybody wants to go down the advice route. Paraplanning is a much needed support function within, and is so much more actually than a support function within businesses. But now you can take an apprenticeship route that focuses on that paraplanning role. So whether you've got somebody that is not keen on the advice part, doesn't want to be front and center when it comes to clients, you can choose the paraplanner route. But for somebody that does want to take that advice route, they will have apprenticeship functionality that will focus on that side of things as well. So one apprenticeship standard, but focusing on 2 different pathways, and dependent on the route that the individual apprentice takes will depend therefore on the sort of competencies that will be looked at and the work involved in those, so that it is really, really relevant to each of those different role types. You'll see at the bottom of this slide as well that I've popped the Skills England website there. That is well worth a look if you are considering apprenticeships, so you can see all of the different standards within financial services. Have a look at the funding plans as well to understand a little bit more about that, and indeed look at which training providers are providing these particular apprenticeship standards. Alex, you mentioned it earlier on as well, that within each apprenticeship programme, you can take them, if we're looking at the level 4 here, you can take that either through LIBF, CII or CISI. And again, this from someone outside looking in, I would encourage you all to look at different training providers, look at different qualifications and choose the ones that suit the apprentice most, and indeed your business. So there is lots and lots of choice around which apprenticeship route to take, how to go about it, and indeed the support that is available for each. Hope that helps. Okay, so some of these questions we have answered. So I think we've answered Jason's question there. So I'm going to move on to the next one. So I think there's 2 questions in this one really. So are there any age limits for apprentices to come on board? I love this question and I could talk about this for hours, but I'm going to shush because I will talk about it for hours. John, do you want to pick this one up?
Yeah, I mean, basically 16-year-old onwards. But obviously when it comes to financial advice, you need to be of an aged contract. So you need to be, to actually advise, you need to be at age 18. So it's an interesting one because you can fulfill apprenticeship standard, and obviously clearly from age 16. And actually you can take the qualification, but you wouldn't be able to become a financial advisor if you see it. So obviously it'd be very difficult to do the skills and knowledge at age 18. So I would say start at level 3 at a maybe younger age and start developing people through that program. And then the other part of that question, which is the pay scales, which is obviously it's an interesting one, this one, because this is the one I could talk about for hours, Natalie. I think this is me, because I don't really rate the minimum pay standards for apprenticeships, if I was being perfectly honest with you. So the rule, is actually for 16 to 18-year-olds, it's £7.55 an hour is the minimum pay. But let's get this right. It's the minimum, right? Okay, it's the minimum. And then after that, it's if you're 19 years and older, it's still £7.55. But after the first year of the apprentice, you then move up to £10 an hour. Now, is that any way to develop loyalty and the best people in your business and all the rest of it, when actually the national minimum wage is considerably more than that? I would say possibly not, especially as you're not paying for the training as well. I would say pay what that person is worth to you and your business and to them and what you're going to do, and give them a living. Because I think actually you'll be surprised if you have a look at the examples that Alex and I have been giving today. You'll see what value they have to your business. And I think it's far greater than you possibly can imagine. And not only that, will you develop loyalty long term? Yes. You'll keep them with you. They'll see a career path, and they'll see that actually that loyalty will be repaid in a very, very big way. So I hope that answers that question. But yeah, I'm just extraordinarily passionate about this, because, can you afford not to pay them a decent amount of money? You know what I mean? If you don't, and somebody else can, you're going to be out-competed by somebody else down the road, which of course is not what you want, because then they don't complete their apprenticeship and all the rest of it. So think about what you're doing in a very competitive market. Does that answer the question, Natalie? Have I got that?
Very eloquently put there, John. Thank you very much. Alex, do you have anything to add, either from the sort of age eligibility piece or indeed the pay scale?
Only to look at the other end of the age eligibility, really. So 16 plus, yeah, absolutely. But there's no upper age limit at all, which I think is wonderful.
It is, absolutely. And that's exactly where I was hoping you'd go, because for sort of people mid-career, considering a career change, think about the amount of skills that they can bring with them and that value that can provide to your business as well. We've done a few case studies here over the last couple of weeks, and like completely differing ends of the spectrum, from a very young person to somebody that was much, much older in life. And that particular lady who was older when she did an apprenticeship, she even said prior to the apprenticeship, surely I can't do an apprenticeship because I'm far too old for that. She now says you can definitely teach an old dog new tricks, and the business that she's been involved with is so grateful that they were able to do that with her, because of the value that it has given them. Okay, one other question in here. Oh, there might be a couple. For a level 4 apprenticeship, are there any minimum requirements? Example, GCSEs, A levels, minimum experience. Alex, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so for the level 4, I look at the experience element first. The individuals do need to be working in the industry and working in a relevant role. So in terms of experience, you absolutely do need to be in a relevant role. In terms of the amount of experience, a couple of years experience would be fine. Some experience is needed, because we need to be, as John was saying, it's not just about taking somebody who's got no experience and turning them into a financial advisor. It's ensuring that they've got some experience already, but not too much that there's nothing they can learn on the apprenticeship. So it's been looking really carefully at the individual's role and mapping it against the competencies, I think. In terms of the English and maths requirements, every provider may differ in the guidance that they give, but essentially for over 18, I think over 16 or over 18, John, they don't need to have the minimum grades in English and maths, no. But there are opportunities for them to undertake those if you as an employer feel that those are relevant to the role. So you can absolutely do those alongside the apprenticeship, but over 18, there's no requirement for those to be there. Obviously 16 to 18, there is a national requirement for anybody in education and training to look into achieve a grade C or a grade 4 in English. So that would be as part of the programme. But again, governments change and priorities change, so that is a movable feast in itself. But essentially for over 18s, which is predominantly what we'll be looking at, there's no requirement for that, but is there as an option to include in the apprenticeship if the learner and the employer want to include that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean the only thing we advise over 18 is that there is a, they come with a minimum standard of English, with not a qualification, but as you can imagine, the courses and the qualifications are written in English, and obviously a good understanding of English is really, very, very important from that perspective. So especially for non-nationals, we don't want to exclude them, but it's impossible for any awarding body to be able to sort of write those courses in various different languages. It has to be, so we stick to English as a standard, and that's really the only proviso I'd give to that. By the way, Lorna, you've made my day. By the way, I am 44 and on an apprenticeship program. It's great. I mean, I just love that. Sorry, what a wonderful thing to have in the comments. So that is lovely. You have made my day. Thank you.
I hadn't even seen that, so I have now, hence the body language change there. Absolutely brilliant. There is one final question, and then we are going to have to wrap up because of time, but I just want to cover this off. Where can we get more information on funding and related financial info? Best place to go for that?
Come to us, or so I guess so either Davies Group or come to LIBF, and we will talk you through all of that. I suppose is probably the most succinct and quick answer I can give you. Clearly,
thank you, John. And I guess I'll make that more slightly well-rounded from the Talent Alliance point of view. So any training provider will probably be the best bet in terms of those funding-based questions. And again, it's going to form part of your due diligence when you are looking at different training providers and the right route that is there for you. But absolutely, to round this webinar up, just myself say thank you to Lorna for putting that in at the end there, because that's a fantastic way to end this webinar. So thank you very, very much for sharing that. I do hope that you have thoroughly enjoyed this webinar, that it's given you some really good information and support and guidance around apprenticeships. By all means, we are very happy on the New Talent Alliance for you to get in touch with us directly if you'd like to. You can also go to the New Talent Alliance website and find some further information around different routes into the industry. Of course, the apprenticeship-based stuff is there as well, and you will also find the recording of our last webinar on there as well. So if there's any sort of gaps to some of the information that we've given you today, it is likely to be on there. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you very much, Alex and John, for very eloquently answering the curveball questions that I threw at you this afternoon, and for joining me on this webinar. We will see you all next time. Thank you all very much.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.